Hey, it's Jacob. Welcome to this new video where you're going to learn what programming language you should learn first. By the end of this video, you'll have a crystal clear overview of what programming language to learn depending on what you want to do, and I'll give you one simple reason for it. And specifically, you'll learn what matters when making a decision with very limited information, how to make sure you don't waste time learning a useless or dated programming language, and how to read an entire Excel file with a single line of code. And make sure to watch till the end if you don't want to miss out on a step-by-step action plan to know the impact learning programming can have in your life. So let's get started. So the first problem you might have is that there are just too many of them. There is like C, C++, Python, Java, JavaScript, MATLAB, Perl, Bash, Lisp, and a lot of other ones. And when you find out about all of these programming languages, you might feel like you're overwhelmed or intimidated. What if you choose the wrong language? You will have invested a lot of time for nothing, and that's a huge risk. In this case, being afraid of choosing the wrong language and moving backward because you have to choose the right one is 100% valid. Another problem you might have is that sometimes people are not clear about it, either about the language to choose because they give you a huge list of different programming language with pros and cons. I'm going to talk about this in a second. Or because there are a lot of people saying different answers, and so you don't know which one is the correct one. It might feel like it's a huge waste of time because you have spent all this time researching and you're still unclear about which one to choose. Another problem with looking for an answer to that question is there are more than one programming language that you need to learn. This is the answer you will find on the internet. And this is too much. If it is the first time you're learning a programming language, then it needs to be one single programming language at a time. You can't afford to learn different programming languages at once. It's just too much. It's overwhelming. Or maybe you don't have that problem and you find a resource explaining which language you should choose, and there is a clear answer for it, but it's full of jargon that you don't understand. Which makes sense since it's the first programming language that you need to learn. Assuming prior knowledge to answer this question is inconsistent with this very question. If you are asking what programming language you should learn first, then it makes sense that you don't have any prior knowledge about programming. It's infuriating when people are taking simple questions and they make it more complicated than they are. People who are answering those kind of questions should take complicated questions and make them simple, but they do the opposite. They take simple questions and they make them complicated. This doesn't make any sense. So now let me tell you what not to do when choosing a programming language. Don't make a decision based on a pros and cons list of every programming language, and don't make your decision based on the job market. First, let me explain why those don't work. First, a pros and cons list. The reason why pros and cons lists don't work, it's because it's not useful for you and it's not related to your experience level. It's a very general pros and cons list. And usually when you start, you don't necessarily know what's going to be useful for you. And the second mistake is making your decision based on the job market. And the problem if you do that is you're going to follow a trend based on the job market and at the cost of not taking your experience level into account, which means that you might spend a lot of time learning a programming language because the job market is telling you to do so, but you might waste a lot of time because it's not necessarily the best one to do first. And by the time you will have learned that language, there will be a new trend. So you will have wasted all that time for nothing. And so if you are still unsure of what to do, even after having done all the research, don't worry about it. It makes sense because those approaches of answering that question don't actually help. And the reason why they don't work is because they depend on a specific goal. And what you really need is a programming language independent of your goal. You need to be able to change your goal, and you need the programming language to still be useful to you because you will have tons of projects in your life. And so it doesn't make sense to learn one programming language for a specific project and then you choose another project and then you need to learn another one. So what is the one thing that is independent of everything else? Well, it's time. Throughout your life, whatever happens, you will always want to stop wasting your time doing things you don't want to do. And so there is one programming language that is the best to do that. It's Python. And I'm going to explain why in a second. But understand that it's like at school, right? You start by learning the things that will be useful whatever happened. Like if you learn English, then that's going to be useful in the future. It's independent of what you're going to do. And so it's the same thing here. You will always need to streamline your processes when you work to make things more efficient. And that's what Python is good at. Why is it good at doing that specifically? Because it's really easy to use Python to deal with Excel files, to deal with PDF forms, to deal with emails and all those things that you will have to use whatever your job is. And of course, it can do all of the other things that other programming languages can do, but it is extremely good at dealing with those specific problems that you will have, whatever you will be doing in the future. And so understand that time is the most precious thing, because if you lose it, it's lost forever. And Python really is the best tool to help you stop waste your time doing mindless work. And so there is another thing to understand about doing things that take energy out of you. It's that willpower is limited. What we now know is that willpower is limited, meaning that if you are using it throughout the day, at the end of the day, you will be depleted of all willpower. And why do we care? Well, if we are depleted of all willpower, we won't be able to make smart decisions. And what is the cost of not saving our willpower and making poor decisions? I mean, I don't have an answer to that because it depends on you. I just know there is a cost to it. And if you let Python make those small decisions, you will have more energy to dedicate to important decisions in your life. Another thing that you will always need in your life is to make less mistakes in redundant data entry. For example, if you are going to fill out PDF forms or if you are going to put data into an Excel file, then you don't want to make mistakes doing this. And Python is the best way to do that without you having to spend your time to double check. And now what about the other languages? Well, Bash could do that, but it's not easy to use on Windows. MATLAB could do that, but it's not free. There is C, but it's not really great at doing this. I mean, just to give you an idea of how simple Python is, each line of code in Python accomplishes 6 times more than one line of code in C on average. And just so you know, you can also do web, mobile, or desktop app development with Python. But really what's interesting to me is that it seems to become the standard AI programming language. And so this language has a ton of potential for the future. Another thing is if you're a graphic designer, if you're using GIMP, you can use a version of Python called Python Foo. So if you are doing repetitive tasks on GIMP, you can use Python for it. And so because Python is already broadly used, it is very unlikely to disappear. But the main thing is that Python is great to create your own tools. If you want to deal with Excel files, for example, or like if you want to add a row at the end of an Excel file or a column based on data in other files, or if you want to read Word documents, or if you want to modify Excel files based on a Word document, if you can do it, Python can do it too. And so let me show you how to read an Excel file with one simple line of code, just to show you how easy it is. So there you are. You can read an Excel file just using that line of code by replacing the name of your Excel file by what is written in between the parentheses. You can then use the book variable here to access all of the data in that file. Now, if you don't know about programming, you might think that there is 2 lines, but the first line is just a comment. So this one can be removed and it's not going to change how it works. The reason why it's a comment is because there is a pound sign at the beginning of it. So congrats, you now know how to read an Excel file in Python. And now let me give you a 3-step action plan to know exactly the impact Python can have on your life. Step 1, list repetitive tasks that you are doing on your computer. Step 2 is categorize them. Is it sending mails, Excel, Word documents, sorting folders, or is it other things? You can even have a category called other things. Step 3 is estimate your time. Estimate the time it takes per week for each category. If you sum up the categories, except for the other things category, and the amount is more than 5 hours per week, then you are extremely likely to benefit a lot from learning Python. If it's not, you can still learn Python, but it's more likely to be useful for traditional programming language tasks. Now, if you've decided that it was worth it to you to learn Python, you can do it by yourself. I mean, I showed you how easy it is to read an Excel file in Python. The problem is there are a lot of ways to do the same thing in Python. And so I know a lot of people that got overwhelmed by doing it alone, and so they give up on their project and they give up on learning Python altogether. That's the reason why I created a free online course to help you avoid wasting your time and energy to figure it out. You can click on the link in the description to get it. Now you might be wondering if it's actually really hard to learn Python, and I'll talk about this in the next video. Have a great day and see you in the next one.